Students, I give this to you. All right, so today we're going to talk about the promotional E in marketing. And I wait till the end of class to talk about the promotional E because, or towards the end of the semester, because this is the one that is probably the most entertaining for everybody, including myself. And so as you're starting to go to sleep and lose interest at the end of the semester, we can watch ads, and isn't that funny? I mean, that's always good for a laugh, and it's something other than just listening to me talk. But it's the one that is really the easiest to get wrong in many respects because of errors in communication. So one of the things that I have given you is I gave you a handout on social styles, and in the personal sales program, professional selling program, we spend a lot of time talking about social styles. And the idea that about 75% of the people that you come into contact with every single day will not communicate the same way as you. They will be different. They will have a different social style, and that makes communication difficult. And so when we talk about the promotional aspect, which involves advertising, promotion, coupons, public relations, personal sales, communication is absolutely critical. And if we go back to the beginning of the semester, we talked about the idea of philosophy answers three great questions: the question of knowledge, the question of conduct, and the question of governance. And I said, with regard to this question of knowledge, a lot of it is not as easy as we think it is. And one of the things that I asked you, and I'll ask you again, is what is this? And you all will probably tell me that it's a what? It's a table. I don't know if we decided whether or not it was a table or a desk at the beginning of the semester. I think we sort of left it up there. And so if we can't even decide again whether or not this is a table or a desk, then how are we going to know that we're really effectively communicating with our customers, clients, and constituents in marketing? And so I put the model of communication up here that you should remember from your principles class. And I want to give you a couple of examples, and I want to ask you where in this model, these two, I'm going to give you two examples of problems in communication, and I want you to tell me what parts of the model these problems illustrate. There is probably nothing worse than being read to. I've said that before. I think one of the most horrific punishments that I could undertake on recalcitrant college students would be for me to sit there and read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason to you very slowly. I had to read it myself in my graduate work, and it was painful to read on my own, and I can't imagine it being any better to be read to me by somebody else. But having said that, I'm going to read a passage to you from a book called Snowball, which is the authorized biography of Warren Buffett. So first let's start with, who is Warren Buffett?
Stock market guru.
Stock market guru? Really? Is he a stock market guru? This should come tripping off your tongues as business students who Warren Buffett is. He is the Oracle of Omaha. He's an investor. He's an arbitrageur in many respects. I think when we think about stock market guru, we think about people on Wall Street. Warren Buffett has been known for arbitrage, and I think I've told you all in the past, there's an old saying in the business world that says, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. If you teach a man to arbitrage, you will feed him and his family for generations to come. And I've told you in the past that what is the character that Richard Gere plays in a movie called Pretty Woman? What is he? He's an arbitrageur, right? He buys businesses and breaks them up and sells them because they're worth more as their constituent parts than they are as a whole. That's arbitrage. It is, from an economic standpoint, it is engaging in investment in which, at least in one temporal period, there is little or no risk to the investment. So you can make an enormous amount of money in arbitrage. So Warren Buffett is an arbitrageur, and at one point in time, there's a rather large business on Wall Street called Salomon Brothers, which was an investment firm. And one of the arbitrageurs there, or actually it's not an arbitrageur, one of the investors in the firm who deals with government securities, treasury bills, is a guy named Mosier, and he engages in what is rigging of the government securities bid process, and it leads to problems with Salomon, and Salomon is about to go down. And so they convince Buffett to take over Salomon. He's on the board of directors of Salomon. Buffett his own company is called Berkshire Hathaway, which was actually a textile manufacturer many, many years ago, and he kept the name Berkshire and sold off all of the textile stuff. That's arbitrage, and kept the name. And if you had invested in Berkshire Hathaway at the beginning, a $1,000 investment, by the time that this was taking place in 1996, I believe, would have been worth $3 million. A Class A share of Berkshire today is trading for, let's see, just out of curiosity, Berkshire stock. Class today is $219,940.50 today. So he's extremely successful. This one little trader basically leads to the real almost downfall, an actual downfall of Salomon. And one of the reasons that it starts to fall is that they didn't have sufficient compliance and oversight of this. And so it goes all the way to the top of Salomon Brothers, and the CEO of Salomon at the time is a guy named John Gottfried. Gottfried is asked to resign. They asked the government, basically the Fed and the SEC, ask Warren Buffett if he'll take over. So you probably know who Warren Buffett is. You probably don't know who his alter ego is. It's a guy named Charlie Munger, who's a lawyer, who's the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. So Gottfried resigns, and he says that he will agree to be a consultant for Salomon. He really views this as a sacrifice on his part. And before he resigns, his lawyer goes over and tries to talk to Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger about a severance package for him. And everybody agrees that his lawyer, whose name was Philip Howard, left that meeting with Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett without a signature on the severance agreement. He wanted an astronomical amount. In the corporate world, we call this a golden parachute. He had a golden parachute provision. But a lot of those golden parachute provisions are nil or will be voidable if you engage in negligence or gross negligence in your fiduciary duties towards the company. And so they don't agree on a severance agreement, but apparently Philip Howard thinks that maybe they had, that he had been negotiating with Buffett and Munger. But it turns out they weren't really negotiating because Charlie Munger wasn't really paying attention to the whole thing. And so I want you to listen to this. I'll read the passage. It's worth listening to, and tell me what part of this model over here we're dealing with in terms of problematic communication. It was the young president of the New York Stock Exchange, Dick Grasso, who was to choose the 3 graying arbitrators that would decide John Gottfried's fate in a dingy conference room at the New York Stock Exchange. A team of lawyers from Cravath, backed by testimony from Salomon board members, employees, ex-employees, Buffett, and Munger, began to pulverize John Gottfried in a process that took more than 60 sessions and several months before the arbitrators. Over and over, the arbitrators heard about the meeting between Charlie Munger and Philip Howard, in which Howard reviewed the list of compensation that Gottfried felt he was entitled to. Munger listened in some fashion or another. All agreed that Howard left without a signature on Gottfried's severance papers, but there was no agreement about how to interpret the rest of the events that evening. Howard was certain that Munger had made a deal with him. So these are what we call, in terms of contractual, agreements, this would be what we call parole evidence. Evidence that's outside of the four corners of the agreement because they don't actually have an agreement. Gottfried's lawyers decided to call Charlie Munger as a witness. Frank Barron of Craveth, Swain, and Moore had attempted to prepare Munger, who was utterly impatient with the entire process. Although Barron had prepared Munger by himself, Munger, a lawyer who disliked paying legal bills, extemporized to the arbitrators that in preparing him for testimony, Craveth had employed an excessive number of expensive paralegals and aspirin carriers. When he began to testify, every word that came out of his mouth had nothing to do with what we had gone over, said Barron. Putting Charlie Munger on the witness stand was the most nerve-wracking, hair-raising experience I've ever had as a lawyer. Munger's confidence, on the other hand, was unmatched. A number of times, the lead arbitrator, growing irritated, admonished him, "Mr. Munger, would you please listen to the question before you answer them?" Munger insisted that on the night he had met with Philip Howard, he was deliberately not listening. I was being polite, but I wasn't paying much attention. I had sort of turned my head off. I was just sitting there politely with my head turned off. Gottfried's lawyers asked him whether he had made a conscious decision not to talk as well as not to listen. "No," said Munger. "When the time came to talk, I talked. One of my faults. I'm fairly outspoken. I may well have discussed some individual things that got through my band of indifference. This is one of my most irritating conversational habits. It has followed me throughout the course of my life. So every time something would get through and I could see a counter-argument, he said I would give it." Howard had asked for indemnification for Gottfried against lawsuits. Being a legal matter, this had gotten through Munger's band of indifference. "I said to him, 'You don't even know what you're going to need. God knows there will be litigation. This will be a big damn mess. Who knows how things are going to work out? You're misrepresenting your own client if you think it makes any sense to get into any of those issues at this time.'" "Was this a conversation in which you were tuning out?" asked Gottfried's lawyer. "No, I tend to tune in when I'm speaking myself," said Munger under oath. "I tend to remember what I say." "Was this a conversation in which you were deliberately not listening at various times?" "What did you say?" said Munger. "I tuned out again. I wasn't doing it on purpose." "Was this a conversation in which at various times you were deliberately not listening?" "I'm ashamed to say I've done it again. Will you please do it one more time? I'll try to make an effort." Gottfried's lawyers repeated the question for the third time. "You bet," said Munger. "I was going through the motions." In what mental state the arbitrators, the lawyers, and Gottfried heard these words can only be imagined. Regrettably, much of the misunderstanding seems to have laid in Philip Howard's unfamiliarity with the outward signs of the workings of Charlie Munger's mind. He had labored that night under the illusion that he and Munger were having a conversation. He didn't recognize Munger's occasional replies as intermittent thought bursts ignited by some random mic that had pierced Munger's band of indifference. Whenever Munger objected, Howard assumed they were negotiating. Not that he was simply being lectured to. When Munger said nothing or emitted a grunt to move the conversation along, Howard had inferred that Munger agreed, or at least that he had no objection to whatever had just been said. No one explained to him that Munger's head was turned off. Gottfried's lawyers reminded Munger of Buffett's testimony in which he acknowledged saying to Gottfried that he had the power to make all of this happen. Did Mr. Munger recall Mr. Buffett saying that? "I don't remember Mr. Buffett's words as well as I remember my own," said Munger, "but certainly the gist of the thing was that you can count on us to be fair." The issue was what was meant by fair. Solomon never disputed that money was Gottfried's and that he had already earned some of it. The argument boiled down to whether Gottfried would have been terminated had all the facts been known. Thus, the case became an exercise in proving that Gottfried should have been terminated. Even Donald Freudstein agreed that in concealing what he knew from Glauber, Gottfried had been dishonest with the government. Although everyone thought this bizarre and out-of-character behavior, nonetheless it had happened. In fairness to Solomon, Gottfried understood why the firm was expending so much effort to prove he should have been fired. He knew it was in everybody's interest to vilify him, but the lack of proportionality bothered him. At some point, it should have ended, he thought. Nonetheless, everyone, Buffett included, felt that Gottfried was entitled to some amount of money. Buffett had Sam Butler, a fellow Geico board member and friend of Gottfried's, call him twice and offer him $14 million. Butler whispered, "I can probably get you a little bit more." Buffett would have gone to 18, but Gottfried had been humiliated by the process. He considered Charlie Munger mean-spirited and self-righteous. He turned the offer down indignantly. The arbitrators would decide. After months of testimony lasting until the spring of 1994, the arbitrators were showing their impatience at the endless circular and conflicting arguments, one side professing complete innocence and the other portraying Gottfried as an arch-fiend. Then, at closing statements, Gottfried's lawyers showed up with a chart, raising the demand to $56.3 million by adding interest, penalties, stock appreciation, and other items. The lawyers and people involved at Solomon had set up a betting pool as the arbitration crawled at an agonizingly slow pace towards its conclusion. How much money would the arbitrators give Gottfried? The lowest bet was $12 million. The highest bet was $22. No one will ever know what factors the arbitrators weighed in their decision. When the decision was announced, they awarded Gottfried nothing, not even a dime. All right, so looking at this model and going back, what part of this model illustrates what was going on with Charlie Munger? You think it was decoding on his part? I think he decoded some of the messages, didn't he?
Yeah.
These random mites would pierce his band of indifference. What is the band of indifference that they refer to in that model? It's what happens with you all when you start tuning me out, when you play on your phone. Which is what? It's noise. Yeah, it's noise. My band of indifference, or your band of indifference to me, is the noise. It's the happy party you're having in your head about not being in this class any longer and talking with your friends on the phone. Or not talking with them, as the case may be, because we know that you're horribly afraid of rejection, and so you like text messaging much better. But that's noise, right? That's what's going on there. It's the random thoughts that just pop into your head and fly. It can be a lack of clarity in communication, but in this instance, it's this idea that I'm just going to shut off. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. So I want to show you another problem with the communication process, and I want you to tell me which part this ad illustrates in terms of problematic parts of the communication model. We'll watch two of these.
I live in a world of complete darkness. I am totally blind.
I've been blind since birth.
I lost my sight to eye disease,
I lost my sight in Afghanistan, and it doesn't hold me back.
but my blindness can affect my sleep patterns.
I go through periods where it's hard to sleep at night and stay awake during the day. But I learned that my struggle was with non-24.
Non-24 is a circadian rhythm disorder that affects up to 70% of people who are totally blind and can't perceive light. Talk to your doctor about your symptoms and learn more about Non-24 by calling 844-844-2424. That's 844-844-2424 or visit my24.com.
Now I know that Non-24 is real.
And I'm not alone.
It's time for a new day.
Let's watch another one.
I am totally blind. I began losing my sight to an eye disease when I was 10. But I learned to live with my blindness a long time ago. So I don't let my blindness get in the way of doing the things I love. But sometimes it feels like my body doesn't know the difference between day and night. I struggle to sleep at night and stay awake during the day. I found out this is called Non-24, a circadian rhythm disorder that affects up to 70% of people who are totally blind.
Learn about the link between Non-24 and blindness. Call 844-824-2424. That's 844-824-2424. Or visit your24info.com today.
Don't let Non-24 get in the way of your pursuit of happiness.
What's wrong with that?
They're targeting people that can't watch their ads.
Ah, yeah, they're targeting people who, there's a field of experience problem here. If you're congenitally blind, which means you've been blind since birth, is this the most appropriate medium for your ad?
Probably not.
I mean, a big part of communication is what? It's what? It's visuals. A big part of communication, and particularly when you're talking about choosing your medium, a big part of television is what? The visual. I mean, these are happy stories. It looks, I mean, she's got a beautiful home, she's got a dog, and a child. I mean, she's living a healthy and fulfilled life. But to your target audience, does any of that matter?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. It is, I mean, people that suffer from vision impairment do watch television because it's so ubiquitous in our society. But is this really the most effective ad?
Right.
What medium might be more effective? Maybe radio. Maybe radio?
I mean, are they going to be, I don't know, just if they're a passenger in a car,
Yeah,
right?
I guess.
Yes.
There's a whole lot, I mean, you spend a whole lot of money here on this ad, and a lot of it is it's nonverbal communication that makes it appealing.
Well, maybe
So-
they are hoping that their spouses will see it and know that, well, my spouse is going through this, so maybe that's targeting somewhat to their.
So you think it's targeting not necessarily the decision maker, but an influencer
Yeah,
in the process, okay?
could be. I mean, who knows?
All right. So, nonverbal communication, a lot of what we say, it's not what we say, it's how we say it. And what we don't say can be just as important as what the actual words are. And it turns out that it's not just communicating with other people, it's also about communicating with ourselves. We also communicate with ourselves. And so, in thinking about this, I want you to think about this. Let's see if I've already got it on here. Since a lot of it's nonverbal communication, we have not watched this in here, have we?
I don't
The
think so.
cutting TED Talk.
So I want to start by offering you a free, no-tech life hack. And all it requires of you is this, that you change your posture for 2 minutes. But before I give it away, I want to ask you to right now do a little audit of your body and what you're doing with your body. So how many of you are sort of making yourself smaller? Maybe you're hunching, crossing your legs, maybe wrapping your ankles. Sometimes we hold on to our arms like this. Sometimes we spread out. I see you. So I want you to pay attention to what you're doing right now. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. And I'm hoping that if you sort of learn to tweak this a little bit, it could significantly change the way your life unfolds. So we're really fascinated with body language. And we're particularly interested in other people's body language. You know, we're interested in, like, you know, an awkward interaction, or a smile, or a contemptuous glance, or maybe a very awkward wink, or maybe even something like a handshake.
Here they are arriving at number 10, and look at this lucky policeman gets to shake hands with the President of the United States. Oh, and here comes the Prime Minister of it.
So a handshake, or the lack of a handshake, can have us talking for weeks and weeks and weeks, even the BBC and the New York Times. So obviously, when we think about nonverbal behavior or body language, what we call it nonverbals as social scientists, it's language. So we think about communication. When we think about communication, we think about interactions. So what is your body language communicating to me? What's mine communicating to you? And there's a lot of reason to believe that this is a valid way to look at this. The social scientists have spent a long time looking at the effects of our body language or other people's body language on judgments. And we make sweeping judgments and inferences from body language. And those judgments can predict really meaningful life outcomes, like who we hire or promote, who we ask out on a date. For example, Nalini Ambady, a researcher at Tufts University, shows that when people watch 30-second soundless clips of real physician-patient interactions, their judgments of the physician's niceness predict whether or not that physician will be sued. So it doesn't have to do so much with whether or not that physician was incompetent, but do we like that person and how they interacted? Even more dramatic, Alex Todorov at Princeton has shown us that judgments of political candidates' faces in just 1 second predict 70% of US Senate and gubernatorial race outcomes. And even, let's go digital, emoticons used well in online negotiations can lead you to claim more value from that negotiation. If you use them poorly, bad idea, right? So when we think of nonverbals, we think of how we judge others, how they judge us, and what the outcomes are. We tend to forget, though, the other audience that's influenced by our nonverbals, and that's ourselves. We are also influenced by our nonverbals, our thoughts and our feelings and our physiology. So what nonverbals am I talking about? I'm a social psychologist, I study prejudice, and I teach at a competitive business school. So it was inevitable that I would become interested in power dynamics. I became especially interested in nonverbal expressions of power and dominance. And what are nonverbal expressions of power and dominance? Well, this is what they are. So in the animal kingdom, they are about expanding. So you make yourself big, you stretch out, you take up space, you're basically opening up. It's about opening up. And this is true across the animal kingdom. It's not just limited to primates, and humans do the same thing. So they do this both when they have power sort of chronically, and also when they're feeling powerful in the moment. And this one is especially interesting because it really shows us how universal and old these expressions of power are. This expression, which is known as pride, Jessica Tracy has studied, she shows that people who are born with sight and people who are congenitally blind do this when they win at a physical competition. So when they cross the finish line and they've won, it doesn't matter if they've never seen anyone do it, they do this. So the arms up in the V, the chin is slightly lifted. What do we do when we feel powerless? We do exactly the opposite. We close up, we wrap ourselves up, we make ourselves small. We don't want to bump into the person next to us. So again, both animals and humans do the same thing. And this is what happens when you put together high and low power. So what we tend to do when it comes to power is that we complement the other's nonverbals. So if someone's being really powerful with us, we tend to make ourselves smaller. We don't mirror them, we do the opposite of them. So I'm watching this behavior in the classroom, and what do I notice? I notice that MBA students really exhibit the full range of power nonverbals. So you have people who are like caricatures of alphas, like really coming into the room. They get right into the middle of the room before class even starts, like they really want to occupy space. When they sit down, they're sort of spread out, they raise their hands like this. You have other people who are virtually collapsing when they come in. As soon as they come in, you see it. You see it on their faces and their bodies, and they sit in their chair and they make themselves tiny, and they go like this when they raise their hand. I noticed a couple things about this. One, you're not going to be surprised, it seems to be related to gender. So women are much more likely to do this kind of thing than men. Women feel chronically less powerful than men, so this is not surprising. But the other thing I noticed is that it also seemed to be related to the extent to which the students were participating and how well they were participating. And this is really important in the MBA classroom because participation counts for half the grade. So business schools have been struggling with this gender grade gap. You get these equally qualified women and men coming in, and then you get these differences in grades, and it seems to be partly attributable to participation. So I started to wonder, okay, so you have these people coming in like this and they're participating. Is it possible that we could get people to fake it, and would it lead them to participate more? So my main collaborator, Dana Carney, who's at Berkeley, and I really wanted to know, can you fake it till you make it? Like, can you do this just for a little while and actually experience a behavioral outcome that makes you seem more powerful? So we know that our nonverbals govern how other people think and feel about us. There's a lot of evidence, but our question really was, do our nonverbals govern how we think and feel about ourselves? There's some evidence that they do. So, for example, when we smile when we feel happy, but also when we're forced to smile by holding a pen in our teeth like this, it makes us feel happy. So it goes both ways. When it comes to power, it also goes both ways. So when you feel powerful, you're more likely to do this, but it's also possible that when you pretend to be powerful, you are more likely to actually feel powerful. So the second question really was, so we know that our minds change our bodies. Is it also true that our bodies change our minds? And when I say minds, in the case of the powerful, what am I talking about? So I'm talking about thoughts and feelings and the sort of physiological things that make up our thoughts and feelings. And in my case, that's hormones. I look at hormones. So what do the minds of the powerful versus the powerless look like? So powerful people tend to be, not surprisingly, more assertive and more confident, more optimistic. They actually feel that they're going to win even at games of chance. They also tend to be able to think more abstractly. So there are a lot of differences. They take more risks. There are a lot of differences between powerful and powerless people. Physiologically, there also are differences on two key hormones, testosterone, which is the dominance hormone, and cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So what we find is that high power alpha males in primate hierarchies have high testosterone and low cortisol. And powerful and effective leaders also have high testosterone and low cortisol. So what does that mean? When you think about power, people tended to think only about testosterone because that was about dominance. But really, power is also about how you react to stress. So do you want the high power leader that's dominant, high on testosterone, but really stress reactive? Probably not, right? You want the person who's powerful and assertive and dominant, but not very stress reactive, the person who's laid back. So we know that in primate hierarchies, if an alpha needs to take over, if an individual needs to take over an alpha role sort of suddenly, within a few days, that individual's testosterone has gone up significantly and his cortisol has dropped significantly. So we have this evidence, both that the body can shape the mind, at least at the facial level, and also that role changes can shape the mind. So what happens if you take a role change, What happens if you do that at a really minimal level, like this tiny manipulation, this tiny intervention? For 2 minutes you say, I want you to stand like this, and it's going to make you feel more powerful. So this is what we did. We decided to bring people into the lab and run a little experiment. And these people adopted for 2 minutes either high power poses or low power poses. And I'm just going to show you 5 of the poses, although they took on only 2. So here's one, a couple more. This one has been dubbed the Wonder Woman by the media. Here are a couple more. So you can be standing or you can be sitting. And here are the low power poses. You're folding up, you're making yourself small. This one is very low power. When you're touching your neck, you're really kind of protecting yourself. So this is what happens. They come in, they spit into a vial. We, for 2 minutes, say, you need to do this or this. They don't look at pictures of the poses. We don't want to prime them with the concept of power. We want them to be feeling power, right? So 2 minutes they do this. We then ask them, how powerful do you feel on a series of items? And then we give them an opportunity to gamble. And then we take another saliva sample. That's it. That's the whole experiment. So this is what we find. Risk tolerance, which is the gambling. What we find is that when you're in the high power pose condition, 86% of you will gamble. When you're in the low power pose condition, only 60%. And that's a pretty whopping significant difference. Here's what we find on testosterone. From their baseline when they come in, high power people experience about a 20% increase, and low power people experience about a 10% decrease. So again, 2 minutes and you get these changes. Here's what you get on cortisol. High power people experience about a 25% decrease, and the low power people experience about a 15% increase. So 2 minutes lead to these hormonal changes that configure your brain to basically be either assertive, confident, and comfortable, or really stress reactive, and feeling sort of shut down. And we've all had that feeling, right? So it seems that our nonverbals do govern how we think and feel about ourselves. So it's not just others, but it's also ourselves. Also, our bodies change our minds. But the next question, of course, is, can power posing for a few minutes really change your life in meaningful ways? So this is in the lab, this little task, it's just a couple of minutes. Where can you actually apply this, which we cared about, of course. And so we think it's really what matters and where you want to use this is evaluative situations, like social threat situations. Where are you being evaluated? Either by your friends, like for teenagers at the lunchroom table. It could be, for some people, it's speaking at a school board meeting. It might be giving a pitch, or giving a talk like this, or doing a job interview. We decided that the one that most people could relate to, because most people had been through, was the job interview. So we published these findings, and the media are all over it. They say, okay, so this is what you do when you go in for the job interview, right? So we were, of course, horrified and said, oh my God, no, that's not what we meant at all for numerous reasons. No, don't do that. Again, this is not about you talking to other people, it's you talking to yourself. What do you do before you go into a job interview? You do this, right? You're sitting down, you're looking at your iPhone or your Android, not trying to leave anyone out. You're looking at your notes, you're hunching up, making yourself small, when really what you should be doing maybe is this, like in the bathroom, right? Do that, find 2 minutes. So that's what we want to test, okay? So we bring people into a lab, and they do either high or low power poses again. They go through a very stressful job interview. It's 5 minutes long. They are being recorded. They're being judged also. And the judges are trained to give no nonverbal feedback. So they look like this. Like, imagine this is the person interviewing you. So for 5 minutes, nothing. And this is worse than being heckled. People hate this. It's what Marianne LaFrance calls standing in social quicksand. So this really spikes your cortisol. So this is the job interview we put them through because we really wanted to see what happened. We then have these coders look at these tapes, 4 of them. They're blind to the hypothesis, they're blind to the conditions. They have no idea who's been posing in what pose. And they end up looking at these sets of tapes and they say, oh, we want to hire these people, all the high power posers. We don't want to hire these people. We also evaluate these people much more positively overall. But what's driving it? It's not about the content of the speech. It's about the presence. that they're bringing to the speech. We also, because we rate them on all these variables related to sort of competence, like how well structured is the speech, how good is it, what are their qualifications, no effect on those things. This is what's affected, these kinds of things. People are bringing their true selves, basically. They're bringing themselves. They bring their ideas, but as themselves, with no, residue over them. So this is what's driving the effect, or mediating the effect. So when I tell people about this, that our bodies change our minds, and our minds can change our behavior, and our behavior can change our outcomes, they say to me, it feels fake, right? So I said fake until you make it. It's not me. I don't want to get there and then still feel like a fraud. I don't want to feel like an imposter. I don't want to get there only to feel like I'm not supposed to be here. And that really resonated with me, because I want to tell you a little story about being an imposter and feeling like I'm not supposed to be here. When I was 19, I was in a really bad car accident. I was thrown out of a car, rolled several times. I was thrown from the car, and I woke up in a head injury rehab ward. And I had been withdrawn from college, and I learned that my IQ had dropped by 2 standard deviations, which was very traumatic. I knew my IQ because I had identified with being smart, and I had been called gifted as a child. So I'm taken out of college. I keep trying to go back. They say, you're not going to finish college. There are other things for you to do, but that's not going to work out for you. So I really struggled with this, and I have to say, having your identity taken from you, your core identity, and for me it was being smart, having that taken from you, there's nothing that leaves you feeling more powerless than that. So I felt entirely powerless. I worked and worked and worked, and I got lucky and worked and got lucky and worked. Eventually I graduated from college. It took me 4 years longer than my peers, and I convinced someone, my angel advisor, Susan Fisk, to take me on. And so I ended up at Princeton, and I was like, I am not supposed to be here. I am an imposter. And the night before my first year talk, the first year talk at Princeton is a 20-minute talk to 20 people. That's it. I was so afraid of being found out the next day that I called her and said, I'm quitting. She was like, you're not quitting, because I took a gamble on you and you're staying. You're going to stay, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to fake it. You're going to do every talk that you ever get asked to do. You're just going to do it and do it and do it, even if you're terrified and just paralyzed and having an out-of-body experience, until you have this moment where you say, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. I have become this. I am actually doing this. So that's what I did. 5 years in grad school. A few years, I'm at Northwestern. I moved to Harvard. I'm at Harvard. I'm not really thinking about it anymore, but for a long time I had been thinking, not supposed to be here, not supposed to be here. So at the end of my first year at Harvard, a student who had not talked in class the entire semester, who I had said, look, you've got to participate or else you're going to fail, came into my office. I really didn't know her at all. And she came in totally defeated, and she said, I'm not supposed to be here. And that was the moment for me, because 2 things happened. One was that I realized, oh my gosh, I don't feel like that anymore. I don't feel that anymore, but she does, and I get that feeling. And the second was, she is supposed to be here. She can fake it, she can become it. So I was like, yes, you are. You are supposed to be here, and tomorrow you're going to fake it, you're going to make yourself powerful, and, you're going to... and you're going to go into the classroom, and you are going to give the best comment ever, And she gave the best comment ever, and people turned around and they were like, oh my God, I didn't even notice her sitting there, She comes back 3 months later, and I realized that she had not just faked it till she made it, she had actually faked it till she became it. So she had changed. And so I want to say to you, don't fake it till you make it. Fake it till you become it. It's not do it enough until you actually become it and internalize. The last thing I want to leave you with is this. Tiny tweaks can lead to big changes. So this is 2 minutes. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Before you go into the next stressful evaluative situation, for 2 minutes, try doing this in the elevator, in a bathroom stall, at your desk behind closed doors. That's what you want to do. Configure your brain to cope the best in that situation. Get your testosterone up, get your cortisol down. Don't leave that situation feeling like, oh, I didn't show them who I am. leave that situation feeling like, oh, I really feel like I got to say who I am and show who I am. So I want to ask you first, both to try power posing, and also I want to ask you to share this science, because this is simple. I don't have ego involved in this. Give an array, share it with people, because the people who can use it the most are the ones with no resources and no technology and no status and no power. Give it to them, because they can do it in private. They need their bodies, privacy, and 2 minutes, and it can significantly change the outcomes of their life. Thank you.
So what do you all think of that? What do you think in terms of communication? Have you seen people do this? Have you seen people become, basically an alpha or dominant in a group setting, in a group dynamic? It happens in your group dynamics all the time. I watch it as I tell you to work in groups. There will be one person who is definitely the extrovert, who is, they're gonna be the leader of that group. It's interesting from an ethical perspective. We look at this and I think this is great, right? This is absolutely wonderful. You can change who you are, and I think that's wonderful. There's also a dark side that you need to think about, which is what? You can really manipulate people with a lot of this, can't you? Hope and fear pervade American life. And one of the things that we know in communication, and advertising in particular, is that they are one of the biggest motivators to purchasing decision making in business. And how can you create fear? Well, you can use things like dominance to create that kind of fear. So when we think about the marketing or the promotional mix, we've got various aspects of it, right? So what we want to do is we want to tailor the promotional mix to the product that we're selling or the service and the outcome that we desire. So what are the elements of the promotional mix? Well, they're advertising, personal selling, public relations, sales promotion, and direct marketing. Each of these has advantages and disadvantages. We used to teach entire classes called advertising here in the marketing department. We no longer teach those classes. We teach a course called integrated marketing communication, because the realization is that what you need to do is you need to integrate all of these things. We used to have people, and we still do in the marketing practice, you'll have advertising agencies that will deal largely with print or media, print or television media, or radio, and then you'll have people that are great at couponing or direct mail or promotion, things like that, or public relations, and then of course you have your sales force. And the need is that rather than to have these as distinct silos, you need to have somebody who coordinates so that you are certain that among all of these different elements of the promotional mix, you are speaking with a single voice in that promotional mix. You see this particularly played well effectively in the political marketplace, where you find candidates who are really good at integrating this marketing communication. Bernie Sanders is one of the most disciplined politicians I have ever seen in my entire life. He has got that down in every speech he gives, in every piece of promotion that they send out, in every ad that they play, in every interview he does with the news media, which is public relations. What does he talk about? He talks about social inequity. He is an enormously disciplined politician in that. You could ask Bernie Sanders what time of day it is, and out would come, we have a rigged system in our economy, and we must start insisting that the upper classes pay their fair share. On the other side, you have George W. Bush, who was one of the most disciplined politicians I had ever seen. His first election in which he was successful, he ran for Congress in the 1980s and lost. Got beat like a drum in Texas. for Congress. He went off, toddled off to start an oil business that wasn't terribly successful, but his daddy was either vice president or president of the United States at the time. And so he had white knights that came in and saved it. In the midst of this, he decides to buy a struggling baseball team, which is the what? The Texas Rangers. And he convinces the city of Arlington that there will be no more baseball in Texas if they don't build him a new stadium. And he turns his $200,000 investment as basically the managing partner and the spokesperson for the club into a multi-million-dollar investment on his part. When he sold it, I think he made something like $15 million. So he parlayed $200,000 into $14 million. He decides at this time that he's pretty gifted, and he's going to run against Ann Richards, who is by far the most popular governor in Texas at the time. And he was so good at integrating his communication in that political campaign that he went from being a kind of unknown politician, son of a famous person, but not having done anything in his own right, to having defeated one of the most powerful and influential members of the Democrat Party at the time. She was also the most popular governor, not only among her own people, but nationwide. And 6 weeks later, she was out of a job. How did he do it? He convinced people by using effective communication over and over and over again that there were feral hordes of children roaming the streets of Texas, ready to rape, pillage, and plunder at the drop of a hat. Interestingly enough, the crime statistics at the time in Texas had showed that crime was on the decrease in Texas as it was nationwide, and there was a number of reasons for that. One is that we have the graying of the American population. As people get older, they tend to stop being so problematic with regard to crime. If you haven't been killed or gone to prison yet, you're probably going to reform in your ways as you reach middle age. It's just not as much fun to go out and do all of those things. But there was an anomaly in the crime statistics that year. They had never disaggregated. So when you have statistics, you can pull out portions of the statistics, and that's called disaggregation. They had never disaggregated the juvenile crime statistics in Texas. George W. Bush leapt on that. So it looked like there was an increase in juvenile crime. And you could have asked him what time of day it was, and out would come, we must cure juvenile crime in Texas. Crime is becoming more random, more violent, and it's becoming at a younger age. And Ann Richards went from being the most powerful and popular governor in America to being out of a job because he integrated that communication across all of those channels of the promotional mix. He was enormously successful at it. And so it's one of those things that he really was very much a type A sort of dominant power broker. So you can use this not just for good in your own lives to get that job interview, but you can also use it for, I think, maybe less than wonderful reasons. And we need to think about that from an ethics standpoint as to how we use this kind of social research that we're so good at doing as marketers. So, what makes an ad great? Let's talk about some of your ads. We'll do a couple of your ads, and we may not get all finished. Which group wants to go and talk about their ad first, and then we'll talk about them collectively. Who wants to play their ad first and tell us why it's great? No? Okay, all right. If you open up Google, it should, I'll put it in that.
So you talked about happy ads,
Mhm.
and this one is not that.
This one is not that.
Not happy, very much. But it does integrate that hope and fear into it, so.
I haven't gotten the email yet.
Yeah, it's okay.
I don't think they can shake it so bad.
Dear Miss Carters, congratulations, you've been accepted to the class of 2021. Prepare for a challenging year ahead, which includes losing your virginity to a rapist. You will be taken to the basement and violently raped.
Becoming his third victim.
Will only suspended for a single day, then you're on your own.
So what do you want?
Wow, so that's, so you chose this ad. This is a really powerful ad. So why did you think it was great? What did you think was great about this ad?
Oh, sorry. Well, personally, it's something you don't typically associate. So it was interesting because you start, for me at least, so you start watching it, you're like, okay, well, this is a kind of reaction now, and then it goes into it. That gets your attention.
Accepted to a rate teacher and a college, because they're combining them and they inherently go together, and that's what it's playing on, that fear.
Okay, do you think the ad, one of the things that I thought from the beginning of the ad is, do you know what the ad is for?
Not at first, no. And then I personally would have liked to add this statistic on men being included in that as well. You mentioned only 1 in 5 women, but it's men too. So if they included more men in it, maybe we would have started to get a better understanding before them getting into the middle of the ad. Okay, that's what this is about.
They're not really selling a product as much as just.
No, but I mean, marketing can also be about selling ideas.
So I guess it's hard to say, we're gonna talk about rate first, so they can't really introduce what they're talking about from the beginning, so yeah, it's hard to know what you're talking about.
It sells you on
You have to
hope.
pay attention the whole time.
Right. It sells you on hope and then gives you the figure of it.
Studies show that your generation has an attention span of 8 seconds. My generation had an attention span of 12 seconds. So literally, your generation is Dora in Finding Nemo. Dory, I'm sorry, Dory, in Finding Nemo. Is anybody gonna wait for the end of that ad before they click through it?
I know I almost didn't.
You almost did. So how did you find it?
Well, I saw the video and then I kind of read the link and it was kind of like clickbait. Okay, well, I guess then I have to watch that. If they had shortened it, yeah, I would have, but it's been at 6. That's kind of scratching.
Yeah, it's a long ad. What'd you all think? Wasn't ready for that.
I think it's like almost tailored for our generation because there's all that, like when you get on Facebook, it's always this happened and then ... And so it's almost like you have to click on it. And I feel like the whole ad kind of encompasses that idea of like you're watching it and like, okay, what the heck is this? And then all of a sudden you hear the words and you're like kind of shocked and then you're like, oh, at the end you get it. But
Has anybody who's on scholarships or a different college, or there's a lot of things that people would be, make you pay attention, I guess, maybe. It's not watching it.
What presidential candidate got in trouble for this topic, by the way? John Kasich. In a town hall, somebody brought this up. So one of the audience members brought this up, that a huge percentage of people go off to college and they are victims of some kind of sexual violence. And she asked, what are you going to do to stop that? And one of the things he said is, I'm going to tell you, don't go to parties where there's a lot of drinking.
Right.
And everybody jumped on him and said, why are you making the victim responsive? What do you think about that?
It's a generation gap, maybe.
There are people that say politicians' gaffes are actually when they're speaking the truth. It's when they're lying that we never call them out. We're so used to lies that he was speaking the truth. I mean, there are people that would say that. That's somewhat controversial. So you think that this ad, do you think it works?
I think it's powerful, but I think that the people who are the victims are seeing it and it's powerful for them. I don't know if the predator necessarily is seeing it going, yeah, I want rape. I guess, I mean, it's not telling these people who are being raped to not rape.
Right, but one of the things that they're trying with this campaign, and I don't think it shows it, and one of the things that the vice president has talked about in his campaign efforts to end sexual, Joe Biden's very, very big on this, and he said that, don't be a culture of keeping your mouth shut.
Right.
If you see something, say something. If you see something, be proactive. And one of the things that we do know from studies is that there is a tendency for bystanders to not participate, to say, well, somebody else will handle that. Now, the interesting thing about that is that there are regional differences in some of those studies. Where do you think people are more likely to engage in distressful situations than others? New York or Oklahoma? They ignore a lot more. There are some studies that suggest that they ignore a lot more in places like that are problematic.
At UCOE, I know that the lady over the Council for Wellness and Health, she does a lot of like bystander involvement. Yeah, and she goes to a lot of the club meetings and talks to people about being a bystander, not just standing there and accepting something.
Okay. All right, good. Does another group want to do that?
Yeah, we'll go.
Okay. Don't act so thrilled. Don't be so excited here.
What is it?
It's you.
It's me? Alright, Emma, I know it's not your favorite, but it's time for your medicine, okay? You ready? 1, 2, 3. Emma, Emma, both Emma, banana, famma, for famma, fee, five, for Emma, Emma. Very good, sweetie. How do you feel? Yeah, you did a really good job, okay? So back.
Okay, so why did you all choose this end? Pick cancer.
I think that it takes a different perspective, just because nurses are just as important as doctors. Because the nurses do more interactions with patients.
Okay. What else about the ad?
It kind of shows, like you said, the importance of the nurse, and I think she had cancer. It's kind of like a emotional appeal to the ad as well.
What do you think the intent of this ad is? I think the intent of the last ad is basically to stop sexual violence. I mean, the ultimate goal is to do that. Now, there are multiple ways that you can do that. One is you can make people aware so that they don't become victims. That's one thing that you can do. And I think it does that. It creates awareness in saying that this is a statistic that maybe you should think about. And it does it also by, saying, we should have maybe bystander intervention in some backdoor way. What do you think the purpose of this ad is?
Well, I think that there's such like a shortage of nurses. I think they're trying to just show life. Like there is like happy side to being a nurse. Like you can make someone's day, or who's probably not going to make it, at least make their time enjoyable. And that nursing is not just about like healing people, but building relationships with the patients. And so we're probably trying to push more people to want to pursue career.
Who's the sponsor of the ad? Johnson. Why the hell would Johnson & Johnson do it? If you have, I mean, why the hell would they care?
They're about like families, like endorsing like the family life.
So you think that this is, you suggested that this is about recognizing the importance of nursing, okay, that could be one goal. Do you think the ultimate goal is to encourage people to become nurses? Or is it just the recognition? Go hug your nurse today.
I would say probably the recognition, because from what I took from it is that they're not just like healing physically, they're healing mentally as well. Because you see a bunch of stories about patients who form relationships with their main nurse, and then they just have it's usually a really amazing story behind their whole treatment they receive.
Okay, so again, Milton Friedman would say this kind of ad is the worst form of of corporate responsibility. I mean, what the hell does Johnson & Johnson have to gain by this ad? Why should they do this? I mean, what if you are not contributing to my ROI, my return on investment as a shareholder, you are robbing me of basically my money. You're stealing. That's what Milton Friedman would say. You're stealing from the corporation.
I don't think when they made this ad, thought that, oh, we're gonna get a big return on investment. I don't think that was the purpose of this ad. I think it was to, like he said, to put out recognition for nurses, and the job that they do isn't always the easiest job. But you can build up relationships with your patients and help them through a really trying time. Because obviously there was no mention of Johnson & Johnson in the ad, no product being used or anything. So I think they knew when they made this ad that it probably wasn't going to get them.
Okay, for next time, for this group, I would like you to Google Johnson & Johnson Credo, and then see what your answer changes, or what if it affects your answer for this. So go back and Google Johnson & Johnson Credo.
I feel like they're also doing it to try and make themselves look good as well.
Yeah. That is an argument that a lot of corporate social responsibility would say, don't we all feel good about Johnson & Johnson?
Do they sell hospital products? Do they sell hospital?
They do. Johnson & Johnson is one of the largest pharmaceutical,
So if you're
big
a
pharma.
nurse and you're ordering supplies and using Johnson & Johnson as a supplier.
You might.
Yeah.
That could be. Then you're right. All right. Well, we're out of time. We'll finish this. We'll talk about price and place on Thursday. I will also give you a review for the final exam.